Do not look at him again. Caleb's words cleaved the air like honed blades, his possessive hand clasping Lyra's nape, shielding her wide, terror-stricken eyes from Senator Kincaid. The shattered crystal at her feet was trivial beside her world's profound collapse. That scarred countenance, etched into her nightmares for 15 years, belonged to the man who had incinerated all she held dear. But why did the Alpha leader, known for brutal froideur, protect her? And why did his fingers tremble, as if he craved succor? The Thornbridge Foundation's Winter Charity Gala, at a storied Chicago luxury hotel, had always been a spectacle of obscene opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears above silks and velvets, while the city's elite danced to an orchestra whose expense surpassed most lifetime earnings. For Lyra Sinclair, 22, that magnificence was a stark reminder of her inconsequence. She was a shadow amidst the lights, an event assistant whose sole function was to ensure dignitaries' chalices never emptied and their privileged existences remained immaculate. In the 7 years since arriving at the Thornbridge-owned event company as an orphaned, unassuming young woman, she had learned invisibility was her paramount virtue. To move unseen, to serve unnoticed, to exist without disturbing the natural order. Her hands, calloused by arduous work, knew each curve of the royal silver, each nuance of the fine crystal she now held with reverent care. But fate, Lyra would discover, held scant regard for carefully cultivated invisibility. The crystal goblet slipped, as if by its own volition, shattering against the polished marble. The sound cleaved through music and conversations like a shriek. The ensuing silence was absolute, ponderous as the crimson velvet draperies. 100 pairs of eyes pivoted toward her, some amused, others indignant, most curious about the clumsy assistant's fate. Lyra dropped to her knees amidst the shards instinctively, hands trembling as she futilely sought to reassemble the impossible fragments. Humiliation scorched her cheeks, yet true terror struck her like a fist to the gut when she lifted her gaze. Before her, conversing animatedly with dignitaries about new import tariffs, stood a tall man, silvering hair, eyes cold as forged iron. The scar bisecting his left eyebrow was unmistakable, etched into her memory like a searing brand. Senator Victor Kincaid, the man who had stripped her of everything. For a moment, Lyra was 15 years old again, rousing to the scent of smoke and the sound of screams. The St. Agnes Orphanage for Girls, the only home she had ever known, was ablaze. The kind matrons who had raised her, who had taught her to read and write, who had comforted her when nightmares of her deceased parents awoke her, all gone. And through the dense smoke, as she fled from the second-story window, she had seen that face. Kincaid, standing in the garden like a demon observing his handiwork, the scar starkly visible in the firelight. Panic was a metallic taste in her mouth, acidic and suffocating. Her lungs refused to function adequately, as if the air had grown too thick to breathe. Burning tears blurred her vision, yet she could not tear her gaze from the man who had laid waste to her childhood. Kincaid, as if sensing the oppressive weight of her stare across the throng, began slowly to turn his head in her direction. It was then that the shadow fell upon her. The presence that drew near was not merely imposing. It was primal. The scent that engulfed her was an intoxicating combination of frozen pine, ancient blood, and the electrical essence of a storm about to break over the land. Lyra knew that perfume, even if only from a distance. Every inhabitant of the Thornbridge estate knew it. It was the scent of absolute power, of refined predation, of the raw wilderness barely restrained beneath a civilized veneer. Alpha leader Caleb Thornbridge. The Thornbridge Alpha. Caleb was not merely a ruler, he was a living legend. At 35 years of age, he had commanded an empire not through diplomacy, but through a brutality so efficient that rivals capitulated before his very presence. It was rumored he could tear a man asunder with his bare hands, that his eyes would turn gold like a wolf's when his patience fractured, and that he had rejected dozens of potential mates because none were deemed worthy to bear his heirs. More critically for Lyra, he was known for his utter disdain for social ceremonies. Caleb rarely deigned to attend social functions, preferring the solitude of his Lake Forest penthouse or the ferocity of his secluded hunts. His presence at the gala was already startling. His proximity to a mere event assistant was an impossibility. Yet, there he was. Caleb did not approach. He interposed himself. Like a mountain manifesting from vapor, he positioned himself between Lyra and Senator Kincaid, a rampart of coiled muscle beneath formal black attire that seemed barely capable of containing his sheer immensity. She could discern the profound tension in every sculpted line of his frame, like a rope stretched to its breaking point. His hand, vast and calloused from years of wielded power and primal engagement, descended to the nape of her neck. It was not gentle. It was possessive, imperious, a claim that brooked no argument. He compelled Lyra's face against the rich fabric of his trousers, obscuring her gaze from the world, and most pointedly, from Kincaid. The growl that tore from Caleb's chest bore no human quality. It was a tectonic vibration that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the sprawling estate, causing the grand chandeliers above to chime like ominous alarms. Lyra felt the reverberation deep in her bones, a sound that roused something primal within her nervous system, the instinctive recognition of an apex predator's dominion. Do not look at him again. The command was low, guttural, meant solely for her, yet imbued with an authority that compelled every shifter present in the ballroom to instinctively lower their gaze. It was not a request. It was an absolute decree. The elite gathered remained in stunned silence. Lyra could feel hundreds of eyes riveted upon them, could hear the collective hush of bated breaths. They anticipated an execution, perhaps, or at least a summary dismissal, followed by public lashings. A mere event assistant who disrupted the year's most significant social gathering certainly merited severe reprisal. But Caleb did not drag her to some hidden dungeon. He hoisted her, not gently, but with the efficient possessiveness of one reclaiming what was rightfully his, and carried her from the grand ballroom. His strides resonated like war drums against the polished marble, each resounding step a declaration of unyielding power that no one dared to gainsay. Apparently, the Alpha leader has found a new favorite, she heard someone whisper from behind her, the voice dripping with venomous envy. How fortunate for the girl. The estate's opulent corridors seemed even grander from her new vantage, cradled against Caleb's chest like a prize claimed. Elaborate tapestries depicting the victories of his ancestral lineage cloaked the stone walls, illuminated by sconces that cast dancing shadows in every direction. His scent was more intense now, more complex, an intoxicating blend of leather and cold steel, of frigid nights and heated blood that caused her senses to reel. She ought to be terrified. Any sane person would be. Yet, there was an undeniable quality in the manner he held her, in the taut, controlled tension of his formidable muscles, that suggested he was not the predator she truly needed to fear. At least not tonight. The entrance to his residential penthouse was a masterpiece in itself. Dark, polished wood intricately carved with ancient shifter runes that seemed to pulse with an inner luminescence as they neared. 2 formidable guards flanked the entrance, their expressions carefully neutral as their alpha leader passed with his improbable burden. "Leave us," Caleb commanded, his voice still carrying that supernatural resonance that compelled men to obey without question. No one enters. No one leaves. No one listens. And then the massive doors swung shut with a resounding finality that echoed like a pronouncement of fate. Caleb Thornbridge's residential penthouse was a study in restrained masculinity. There were no feminine soft touches here, no gentle accents to temper the inherent brutality of command. Stark, dark wood furnishings dominated the space, interspersed with a formidable collection of ancestral weaponry and trophies from legendary hunts. A colossal hearth dominated an entire wall, flames casting hypnotic patterns of light and shadow, imbuing the entire chamber with a palpable, sentient aura. But it was when Caleb released her that the night's first true upheaval revealed itself. He did not want her in his bed, Caleb recoiled as if scorched, his hands subtly trembling as he drew away. The expression on his face was not one of lust or possessiveness, but something far more intricate, a visage that bordered on fear. "This is not what you think," he said, raking a hand through his dark hair. His voice, devoid of the court's scrutiny, sounded hollow, almost vulnerable. "The favoritism is a charade, an exigency." Lyra gazed at him, bewildered, still grappling with the surreal procession of events. "I do not comprehend." "No, you do not comprehend." He turned to the window, his broad back taut as a drawn bowstring. "And it is better thus. The less you know, the more secure you shall remain." But security, Lyra would soon discern, was a relative construct in the world of Caleb Thornbridge. In the weeks that followed, confined within the gilded opulence that served simultaneously as palace and prison, she began to perceive the fissures in the Alpha's facade of invincible strength. There were moments, typically during the deepest hours of pre-dawn, when she overheard strange sounds emanating from the adjacent chambers, not growls of fury, but rather guttural moans of agony, as though something primordial sought to rend its way from within his very being. It was during one such night that she unearthed the truth. She had awakened parched and ventured through the opulent suite in search of water when she heard the sound. It was as though one were subjected to protracted torment, a succession of muffled groans interspersed with whispered, incoherent words. Following the sound, she found Caleb in his private study, hunched over his desk as if bearing the cumulative burden of the world. "You should not be here," he said, without lifting his head, his voice taut with suppressed anguish. "Are you wounded?" "Wounded," he chuckled, a sound utterly devoid of mirth. If only it were so simple. It was then that he recounted to her the torment of the Alpha's rage. It was a degenerative affliction that befell Alphas of immense power who failed to locate their fated mates in due time. The very power that rendered them formidable turned inward, corrupting their essence, engendering a perpetual, cacophonous static within their minds, inexorably driving them towards utter madness. The symptoms commenced subtly: throbbing headaches, pervasive irritability, relentless insomnia. Yet they advanced with an inexorable cruelty, until the Alpha devolved into an irrational beast, utterly bereft of the capacity to discern friend from foe. "I have perhaps 6 months before I become a menace to all around me," Caleb Thornbridge admitted, still averting her gaze. Unless what?" Lyra pressed, her voice a fragile tremor. "Unless I find my mate. Or—" He hesitated, the words seemingly torn from his throat with brutal force. "Or find someone with a sufficiently potent lineage to temporarily silence the incessant clamor." The stark realization struck Lyra with the force of a lightning bolt. "That is why you brought me here. Your proximity is the sole reason I have been able to sleep for weeks," he confessed at last. "I do not comprehend why. I do not understand how. But when you are near, the relentless din, it ceases." And then came the revelation that would irrevocably alter everything. Lyra unknowingly possessed the long-extinct Moonvale lineage, a bloodline that had been almost entirely eradicated decades prior, yet carried the singular power to quell lycanthropic savagery. She was not merely an assistant. She was, quite literally, a survivor of a bloodline deemed myth. "How do you know this?" she questioned, her mind reeling with the profound implications. "Your eyes," he stated simply. "When you are frightened or incensed, they become iridescent with pure, unblemished silver. It is impossible to conceal from one who knows precisely what to seek." The weeks that ensued were a complex, harrowing dance of desperate necessity and burgeoning resistance. For Caleb to function throughout the day and achieve a semblance of sleep each night without succumbing to the encroaching madness, Lyra required consistent physical proximity to him. Not romantic intimacy, but a stark, therapeutic proximity, She huddled against his back on frigid nights, her hand upon his pulse during particularly fraught council meetings, her fingers intertwined with his when the gnawing headaches escalated to an unbearable crescendo. It was during these moments of enforced vulnerability that the carefully constructed social ramparts began an inexorable collapse. Lyra discovered she possessed photographic recall, a trait she had meticulously concealed her entire life, fearing unwelcome attention. Yet, when Caleb struggled to focus on strategic maps and ancient dossiers due to the debilitating mental fog wrought by his affliction, she instinctively offered her aid. "Have you perused this intelligence dossier?" he inquired one evening, rubbing his temples as if to dispel the mental haze. "Once," she admitted hesitantly. "I can recite it word for word if you so desire." The manner in which he regarded her in that precise moment, not as an alpha regarding an assistant, but as a man recognizing an intellectual peer, marked the first fissure in the formidable wall that had stood between them. Lyra saw the weary man beneath the mantle of alpha leader. Caleb saw the brilliant strategist concealed beneath the unassuming facade of an assistant. And slowly, inexorably, the alpha mate bond that Caleb had so desperately striven to repress began to seep through his meticulously erected defenses, an inexorable tide. The first true trial of this burgeoning bond arrived during the annual autumn hunt, a month after the Thornbridge Foundation's Winter Charity Gala. It was a solemn clan tradition, a raw display of power, where the alpha and his most trusted pack members tracked through the shadowed expanse of the Whispering Pines Forest Preserve. Caleb had insisted Lyra accompany him, stating her prolonged absence would inevitably lead to the deterioration of his alpha's rage. The winter forest was a realm of argent shadows and lethal silence. Barren trees stretched skeletal branches against a starless sky, and the cold was so profound that each breath materialized as an ephemeral phantom. Lyra rode beside Caleb, cloaked in furs worth more than her annual wages, striving to dismiss the potent sensation of her profound displacement among the pack's elite. It was precisely when the initial arrows sliced through the frigid air that she comprehended they were not the sole predators lurking within the nocturnal woods. Assailants materialized from the tree line like shadows coalescing into tangible form, their visages obscured by masks, rendering them both anonymous and lethal. These were no common brigands. Their movements evinced unsettling coordination, their armaments disquieting refinement. These were professional assassins, their intent honed upon a singular, predetermined quarry. "Protect the Alpha," one of the guards bellowed, his voice utterly swallowed by the ensuing chaos. Lyra was violently unhorsed during the initial charge, tumbling into the snow as the brutal skirmish erupted. Amidst the tumultuous melee, she witnessed Caleb's internal transformation. Not a physical shift, not yet, but his stance coiled, his musculature visibly tensed, and his eyes acquired that infernal golden sheen, signifying the beast clawed just beneath the surface. Yet, their numbers were overwhelming, and even an alpha leader possessed finite limits. It was when an assassin detached from the main contingent and surged directly toward her that Lyra apprehended the abhorrent truth. She was not merely an inconvenient witness. She was the primary target. The terror that seized her transcended the mundane. It was primeval, absolute, the very dread that awakened instincts dormant for generations. And with this primordial fear came an emanation she had never before experienced. Light. Silver light erupted from her form like a miniature supernova, momentarily blinding the attackers and suffusing the entire forest with an otherworldly luminescence. The explosive burst of raw energy persisted for mere seconds, yet it proved profoundly sufficient to irrevocably turn the tide of the desperate battle. Caleb, momentarily unburdened by the exigency of her immediate protection, allowed the full force of the transformation to utterly consume him. His human form dissolved into muscle, fur, and fang, and where a man had stood, now loomed a beast that embodied every lupine nightmare. He was colossal, his eyes blazing like golden embers, his presence so overwhelmingly dominant that several assailants simply dropped their weapons and fled in terror. Those who remained did not survive long enough to mourn their fatal decision. When the profound silence finally reclaimed the Whispering Pines forest, Lyra stood trembling amidst the snow, her gaze fixed upon her own hands as though they were alien extensions. The luminous surge had erupted from within her. She knew this with absolute, primal certainty, even as the how or why remained an impenetrable enigma. Caleb, returned to human form yet still sheathed in blood not his own, knelt beside her. His hands, possessing an unnerving gentleness for one who had just torn apart half a dozen men, cupped her face with profound reverence. "Lyra," he articulated, a timbre in his voice she had never before encountered. It resonated with profound wonder, a nascent spark of hope. "Do you comprehend what you have just unleashed?" "I do not." "You have just proven you are not merely a passive balm," he elucidated, his breath still ragged from the abrupt transformation. "You are a weapon, a living conduit capable of channeling pure Moonveil power." And that earth-shattering revelation irrevocably altered the dynamic between them. For if Lyra was not merely a passive fount of solace for his alpha's rage, but an active, potent force capable of formidable magical manifestations, Caleb no longer possessed the means to command her, and that which defied control was by its very definition a profound peril. The journey back to Caleb's penthouse residential was fraught with oppressive tension and profound silence. Lyra could feel Caleb's gaze upon her, charged with a novel intensity, as if she were an intricate enigma he was compelled to decipher. The fragile accord that had begun to blossom between them had fractured, supplanted by a pervasive caution that inflicted a deeper wound than she had anticipated. Yet it was within the relative sanctuary of his private suite that she truly grasped the profound intertwining of their destinies. Caleb could not achieve slumber without her proximate presence. That much was an undeniable truth. But now, having directly witnessed her raw power, he found himself equally incapable of full relaxation in her company. It was a vicious paradox. He required her essence to tether his sanity, yet her burgeoning, formidable nature imperiled the meticulous dominion he exerted over every facet of his existence. The nights devolved into a silent, protracted battle of wills. Caleb would lie rigid as an unyielding plank, palpably wrestling against the primal urge to draw nearer to her, while Lyra feigned sleep, her mind ensnared by the bewildering question of when her life had descended into such labyrinthine complexity. The nascent alpha-mate bond, perpetually denied and fiercely repressed, began to manifest through acute physical symptoms: throbbing headaches when their proximity waned for too long, an almost addictive craving for corporeal contact, and vivid, unsettling dreams that left both bewildered and yearning in the unforgiving light of dawn. It was during one of these deeply disquieting nights that Caleb finally gave voice to the consuming dread that permeated both their beings. "I ought to release you," he uttered into the oppressive gloom, his voice so profoundly low that she barely perceived it. "Before it becomes irrevocably too late. Before the alpha-mate bond solidifies entirely and you are eternally ensnared by my existence." "And what if I do not wish to depart?" she queried, startling them both with the stark, unvarnished honesty embedded within her question. The silence that followed was fraught with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Caleb Thornbridge turned to confront her in the gloom, his eyes ensnaring the flickering embers of the dying hearth. "You grasp not the gravity of your words. Should this bond coalesce, you will become a beacon for malevolence. Every enemy I possess shall become yours. Solace will forever elude your grasp." "What if I am weary of peace?" she countered, her voice a fragile challenge. "What if I am weary of being unseen, of existing as naught but an inconsequential shadow?" It was then he claimed her first kiss. It was neither tender nor romantic. It was desperate, ravenous, the desperate gasp of a drowning man finally finding air. And when she returned his fervor with equal, searing intensity, her fingers entangling in his thick hair as she pulled him closer. It was as if some primal, cosmic mechanism had irrevocably shifted into place. Yet, even amidst the torrent of raw passion, a melancholic undertow persisted. For they both harbored the chilling knowledge that they dallied with forces far surpassing their comprehension, and that the profound choices forged within the night's deepening shadows would cast repercussions far beyond the confines of their intertwining hearts. Winter's cruel embrace deepened, and with it, the intricate tapestry of their compelled alliance slowly began to reweave itself into something undeniably genuine. But the past, as Lyra Sinclair was soon to unearth, possesses a ruthless predisposition for exacting its bitter recompense. The revelation emerged from the antiquated documents she had been assisting Caleb Thornbridge in collating, records of clandestine investigations spanning many decades. It was there, amidst the dust-laden reports and long-silenced testimonies, that she unraveled the searing truth concerning the conflagration at St. Agnes Orphanage for Girls. Senator Kincaid had not incinerated the orphanage without design. For decades, he had systematically pursued the Moonvale lineage, following faint genealogical whispers and arcane legends to locate the last progeny of a bloodline he believed held the key to his absolute supremacy among the shifters. But the most devastating unveiling arrived within a handwritten annotation scrawled upon the margins of one such report. Young Alpha Caleb was appraised of suspicious activity at St. Agnes. Recommendation: defer intervention to accrue further evidentiary proof. Caleb Thornbridge had possessed the knowledge. Years prior, as a nascent alpha driven to validate his investigative acumen, he had meticulously tracked Kincaid's nefarious operations. Yet, he deliberately chose not to intervene immediately at the orphanage, preferring to painstakingly construct an impregnable case against the influential senator. His calculated inaction had irrevocably sealed the fate of the matrons Lyra had loved as mothers. The confrontation, when it finally erupted, was a catastrophic deluge. "You knew," she articulated, her voice a perilous whisper as she clutched the incriminating document. "You knew, and you perpetrated nothing." Caleb Thornbridge's gaze fell upon the paper, and his complexion blanched. "Lyra, 15 years. 15 years I bore the conviction that they were naught but victims of a cruel, indiscriminate tragedy. But you possessed the power to have salvaged them." "I was 19 years old," he erupted, and for the first time since she had known him, she heard genuine despair in his voice. "I thought I had time. I believed it would be more prudent to construct an irrefutable case against Kincaid before taking action. How could I have foreseen his swift strike?" "You could not have," she conceded, and for a fleeting moment, he appeared hopeful. "But you prioritized political maneuverings over innocent lives. And now you expect me to reconcile that because you were attempting to be cunning." The fragile trust that had tentatively blossomed between them throughout the winter months shattered like delicate glass. Lyra felt as though she were gazing upon a stranger, not the man who had kept her nightmares at bay during the dark nights, but the cold, calculating alpha who had permitted children to perish for political strategy. "I cannot remain here any longer," she finally articulated. "You cannot depart." His voice had reverted to the authoritative cadence she had come to abhor. "Even if I permitted it, you would not survive a solitary week. Kincaid still hunts the Moonvale lineage. So this is your solution? To confine me here perpetually as your therapeutic captive?" The ensuing silence served as a sufficient response. But Lyra was a progeny of her photographic recall and the resolve forged in tragedy. If she could not depart through the main entrance, she would discern an alternative route. The Thornbridge Charitable Fair presented the perfect opportunity. It was a public celebration necessitating the Alpha's presence at multiple venues throughout the day, and security would be fractured between safeguarding Caleb and maintaining order amidst the reveling throngs. More critically, it was a day when a woman attired in common civilian clothes could blend seamlessly among the hundreds of attendees without rousing suspicion. She had meticulously planned, utilizing her perfect recall to map escape routes and guard rotations. What she had not anticipated was how the separation from Caleb would impact her own mental state. Hours after departing the estate, disguised among a contingent of merchants returning to their townships, she began to feel as though she were unraveling from within. Each step away from him was physically excruciating, as if she were rending pieces from her very soul. The alpha-mate bond, even in its incomplete state, had become more potent than either of them had comprehended. It was this escalating frailty that rendered her an effortless target when Kincaid's enforcers finally located her. She had paused at a roadside tavern, striving to decide whether to press onward or retreat, her heart pleading for the latter, her pride insisting upon the former. When the doors swung open and an excessive number of men poured in simultaneously, they were not merchants or travelers, they were hunters, and she was the quarry. "Lady Lyra?" A familiar, abhorrent voice intoned from behind her. "What an unanticipated pleasure to encounter you so far from home." Senator Victor Kincaid loomed with even greater menace outside the civilized confines of public life. Here, devoid of the necessity to maintain aristocratic facades, his true nature was laid bare. He was a predator who had spent decades perfecting his hunt, and she was the most coveted prize in his collection. "Do not trouble yourself attempting escape," he continued conversationally, as though discussing the weather. "My operatives have encircled the establishment, and even should you succeed in fleeing, where would you go? The Alpha leader clearly cares not enough to seek you, or you would still be within his gilded penthouse." His logic was both cruel and unerring. Lyra knew Caleb Thornbridge would eventually sense her anguish through their alpha-mate bond. Yet would it be too late? And more crucially, after the fractured manner of their parting, would he elect to save her or deem her absence a convenient resolution to a complex predicament? "What is your desire?" she inquired, striving to keep her voice resolute. "Direct to the core. I appreciate that." Kincaid advanced, and she could discern the scent of leather and metal that invariably clung to him. "I desire what I have always coveted, power. And you, my dear, are the key to a power that the shifters only know through sagas." He then elucidated, with the measured patience of one who had long orchestrated this, the ritual he had unearthed within ancient texts. It was not merely a matter of taking her life for her blood. Any lesser being could achieve such a feat. It was a matter of transferring the Moonveil lineage to himself through an intricate arcane process, requiring either her conscious cooperation or at least her living presence. "You will ascend to the absolute Alpha," she stated. It was not a query. Not merely supreme, absolute. Capable of commanding any shifter, of healing or inflicting the Alpha's rage at will, of molding the supernatural world according to my grand design. His eyes blazed with authentic fanaticism. "And all I require are a few hours with you and the right ingredients." The pilgrimage to Kincaid's secret rural complex was a nightmare woven from escalating apprehension. Lyra was maintained conscious but restrained, compelled to observe the familiar landscape transmute into alien and hostile territory. Each mile distanced her not only from the Thornbridge estate, but from the singular individual who could perceive her mounting dread. Kincaid's rural complex was a fortress masquerading as an elegant country estate. Externally, it seemed the perfect retreat for an alpha who valued privacy and tranquility. Internally, it was glaringly apparent that it had been specifically altered for his more malevolent objectives. Peculiar symbols had been etched into the stone walls. The air reeked of incense and less identifiable substances, and there was a quality to the illumination that rendered everything slightly surreal. It was within the repurposed dungeon laboratory that Lyra finally comprehended the vastness of Kincaid's obsession. Decades of meticulous research covered the walls, genealogies of vanished bloodlines, chilling witness accounts of Moonveil power manifestations, even preserved specimens of flora and minerals he presumed capable of augmenting shifter magic. Impressive, Wouldn't you agree?" he uttered, observing her horrified gaze. 30 years of devoted labor. You ought to feel honored to be the ultimate piece of this intricate puzzle. Yet, as Kincaid arranged his arcane instruments and intoned incantations in languages long since dead, Lyra perceived a profound shift occurring within her very being. The enforced separation from Caleb, coupled with the absolute terror of her predicament, was awakening facets of her lineage she had never conceived possible. The argent light that had erupted from her in Whispering Pines had not been an isolated incident. It was but a symptom of a far vaster power beginning to unfurl as her very life hung in perilous jeopardy. And somewhere, in the deepening twilight between sundown and midnight, she began to perceive something that simultaneously flooded her with profound hope and raw terror. Caleb was coming. She could feel him through the bond like an encroaching tempest, a primal force of nature propelled by unadulterated fury and desperation. But an unsettling dissonance permeated the sensation, a savage, uncontrolled quality that suggested their separation had propelled the Alpha beyond the precipice of rationality. When Kincaid's arcane defenses finally shattered like sodden parchment, when the reinforced door was ripped from its very hinges as if constructed from desiccated branches, the creature that breached the threshold was not the man Lyra had come to cherish. It was a beast of unadulterated violence, with eyes that seared like molten gold, and fangs that dripped with saliva, and the grim promise of death. The Alpha's rage had finally consumed Caleb entirely, transforming him into a killing machine, utterly incapable of discerning friend from foe. The ensuing carnage was swift and absolute. Kincaid's guards, competent shifters in their own right, lasted mere seconds against an entity that had transcended all mortal limitations. Kincaid, shielded by decades of meticulously constructed magical barriers, watched in mounting horror as his impenetrable fortress was reduced to ruin by a force he had utterly underestimated. But when an unnerving silence finally descended, when only 3 figures remained sentient within the ravaged laboratory, Lyra realized she had merely traded one nightmare for another. Caleb, or the monstrous entity he had become, stood over Kincaid's broken form, still in beast shape, still utterly lost to the rage that had propelled him there. And when he turned towards her, when those molten golden eyes fixed upon her with a purely predatory intelligence, she knew, with chilling certainty, that he did not recognize her. To the primordial beast before her, she was merely another threat to be expunged. The ensuing moment hung suspended, taut as a droplet poised before its inevitable descent. Lyra could elect flight, to seek reprieve while time yet permitted, or unleash an action potent enough to salvage them both, or irrevocably rend them asunder. She embraced a third path, to cease her struggle against destiny's relentless current and fully accede to who she was and the profound unity they might forge. Rather than recoil as the beast surged forward, Lyra advanced. Instead of averting those incinerating eyes, she met their feral gaze directly, and as those lethal fangs descended, nearing her throat, she raised a hand, pressing it against the creature's snout with a tenderness that utterly defied her own fragile mortality. "Caleb," she uttered, imbuing her voice with the full expanse of the affection she had striven to deny. Every nuance of forgiveness he had not sought, the complete acceptance of a future that would be painstakingly wrought from shared scars. "I choose you. I choose us. Now, return to me." The ensuing deluge of silver light was unlike the unbridled burst within the Whispering Pines. This emanation was controlled, precisely vectored, imbued with conscious intent, rather than primal fear. She poured her very soul into his through their burgeoning bond, not as a thrall succumbing to her master, but as a sovereign equal extending profound, unyielding partnership. Caleb's reclamation of human consciousness was akin to witnessing a mountain sunder, and then meticulously reform. His bestial form gradually dissolved, unveiling the man beneath, and as the metamorphosis concluded, he collapsed to his knees before her, as if his limbs could no longer bear the staggering weight of his restored humanity. "Lyra," he rasped, his voice fractured in a manner she had never before encountered. "What have I done? What did I nearly commit?" "You saved me," she replied with stark simplicity, kneeling beside him and cradling his face within her palms. "And I, you. Such is the covenant when two people choose to fight on the same side. Yet, there was an intrinsic cost to the bond's consummation, a profound metamorphosis that transcended the restoration of his sanity. Caleb discovered that his inherent capacity to dissemble or shroud his sentiments had been utterly obliterated by the total imprint. Every emotion, every thought, every regret was now etched upon his countenance, as if rendered in transparent glass. "I should have saved them," he conceded, tears coursing down his cheeks unabashedly, a raw testament to his unbound remorse. "I should have jeopardized everything to safeguard your matrons. I was afraid of making a mistake, so I committed an even greater one." "I know," Lyra affirmed, her voice imbued with a hard-won forgiveness, yet utterly devoid of facile absolution. "And we shall be compelled to coexist with this truth. Both of us must find ways to honor their memories by being better people than we were before." The ultimate conflict proved not physical, but a nexus of political intrigue and arcane power. In the arduous days that followed, as they grappled with the profound emotional devastation of their confrontation, Lyra deftly employed her photographic recall to meticulously reconstruct every incriminating document she had witnessed within Kincaid's hidden complex. Her remarkable ability to precisely recite word for word the clandestine correspondence, the compromising contracts, and the fraudulent financial records became the irrefutable evidence the Council of Elders required to posthumously condemn the senator and unequivocally clear the names of his numerous victims. More significantly, it solidified Lyra's standing not merely as an assistant who had transcended her former station, but as a resilient survivor who had at last secured a measure of profound justice. 6 months after that fateful winter gala, beneath the vibrant glow of the summer solstice, Lyra's Alpha Pair recognition ceremony was no saccharine celebration of a fairy tale. It was the solemn affirmation of a potent pact of power forged between two survivors, who had consciously chosen to transmute their shared scars into an unyielding source of strength. She was no longer the unassuming, crystal-shattering assistant, and Caleb was no longer the solitary alpha slowly succumbing to the encroaching madness of the primal mire. They were unequivocally partners, bound by a brutal, unvarnished honesty, and a love that had been tested in the fiery crucibles designed to irrevocably shatter lesser relationships. The Thornbridge Estate ballroom was resplendent, adorned with the vibrant hues of summer blooms and bathed in a soft, golden light. Yet a uniquely profound quality permeated the entire celebration. This was not a mere exhibition of hollow opulence, but a profound declaration of resolute renewal. The clan members who had gathered to witness the Luna installation were not merely observing the ascent of a new Luna. They were bearing witness to the genesis of a profoundly novel form of unwavering leadership. As the intricately designed circlet was carefully placed upon her head, not a delicate ephemeral tiara, but a substantial piece mirroring Caleb's own, unmistakable symbols of equal partnership rather than archaic traditional hierarchy. Lyra gazed upon the assembled faces and perceived vivid reflections of her own arduous journey. There were other resilient survivors present, individuals who had courageously surmounted impossible circumstances to carve out and secure their rightful places in this intricate world. But it was when the ceremony finally concluded, when the fervent, sustained applause at last receded, and they stood utterly alone upon the majestic dual throne they had meticulously commissioned, that Caleb articulated his ultimate, unspoken vow. His hand found the delicate nape of her neck once more, but this time not to obscure her countenance from prying eyes, or to guide her as if she were mere chattel. His palm curved against her skin with an almost reverential tenderness, with conscious volition, with an enduring love that had fiercely survived the most malevolent, destructive challenges destiny could hurl against them. "Look upon them, Lyra," he intimately intoned. his voice resonating with deep echoes of all they had collectively surmounted, all they had endured together. Let them truly comprehend who genuinely governs this vast domain now. And as her gaze fearlessly ascended, as she permitted her intrinsic fortitude to shine forth unreservedly, an palpable absence of fear now held dominion within the hallowed Thornbridge Estate ballroom. There remained only the profound, undeniable recognition that genuine power emanated not from birthright or savage, untamed might, but from the unyielding courage to embrace vulnerability and the fierce, unshakable determination to safeguard those one cherishes above all else. The broken crystal had been swept away. In its stead, something far more resilient existed. A love forged in adversity, a partnership redefining what it meant to govern with honor. If you enjoyed this tale of a young woman who unearthed her power and an alpha leader who learned strength from accepting aid, subscribe for more intense shifter romances. Hit the notification bell so you never miss stories of fated partners choosing each other despite impossible odds. Remember, the most potent magic isn't in our bloodlines, but in our willingness to trust another with our fractured pieces.